Ian set me up again. Basically, I thought, he originally asked me to talk about my conversion story, and then I thought, well, I'll talk about how I discern my personal call in life. In little bits and pieces. This is not a formal talk. It's not, there are no slides. I've just got a few notes on a piece of paper here. For me, honestly, one of the great, I was just really, it helped me to, as I was trying to prep this morning for this, what are the things I was most grateful for in my life? What's made the difference? One of the huge things was I was raised not as a Catholic, but in a Christian community where it was normal to expect God to change your life. Where it just was normal for me to expect a personal God who loved me. We were raised, I grew up in the evangelical world in southern Mississippi. I remember the first trip I made to Australia, and I mentioned I was raised as a fighting fundamentalist in southern Mississippi, and the whole room gasped. It was in Newcastle. I don't know, they were horrified when I said Mississippi. And I said, they were very, very serious. And I looked at them and I said, let me guess, you've all seen Gone with the Wind. And they all very seriously nodded their heads. And I said, well, things have changed a little bit in the last 150 years. But yes, I grew up in the Deep South and in a world that's very, very different than what most Catholics have grown up in, where we were raised to expect conversion, we were raised to tell our story, we were raised to think of ourselves as evangelizers, and a very, very different world. But I'm grateful for that world, even though I come from a really tough background, even though my family was very devout in its own way. My mother was seriously clinically mentally ill. She is dissociated, meaning the old-fashioned term for it was multiple personalities. And she was also severely abusive. And it was true for all of us, but I was the eldest girl, and so I got the brunt, physically, emotionally, and in every other way. So I am one of those children who should be dead. And are you familiar, maybe you've heard of it, the ACE studies, the Adverse Childhood Experience studies that were done in the US, but it's massive, massive level, looking at sort of 10 sort of classic adverse childhood experiences that children can go through, and their ramifications later in adult life, emotionally, personally, interpersonally, physically, in terms of your health at all levels, your success as an adult, everything like that. Children like me who experienced 5 ACEs, there's 10 of them, and if you have 4 or more, you're in the deep end of the pool, have a 100% chance of being depressed, a vastly larger chance of drug addiction, all kinds of emotional, physical illnesses of all kinds, stress-related illnesses, going to prison, divorce, you name it, across the board, okay? And so it's interesting, simultaneously I received I have these 2 inheritances. One is this very difficult childhood, and the other was, what came alongside it was this knowledge that beyond my mother and beyond what my parents could make available to me, they also passed on the reality that there was a God who loved me, who was a redeemer, a healer, a transformer. And it was interesting, it went, we knew, and all of my siblings, it's interesting, all of us are serious practicing Christians today. I'm the only Catholic in my family since Wittenberg, but everyone else and all of my other siblings are also serious Christians, despite our backgrounds. Honestly, I've often thought that if I'd been raised a Catholic, I would never have darkened the door of the church again. But because I was raised in a world where we knew God was deeper, that there was this living, powerful God who, beyond somehow even the weaknesses of my parents, and as bad as it was, we all absorbed that that was real. There was a depth to the faith passed on to us that transcended even a really, truly terrible childhood. And so all of us have gone on to internalize and make that faith personal. All of us have experienced significant conversion in our lives. And I am so grateful for the grace of the fact, in many ways, the deep religious tenor of the family protected us in a lot of ways. When I think about it, the fact that my mother didn't kill us, I mean, seriously, because she was, as the eldest child, I heard all this, she would go around saying we'd all be better off dead, you know, and how wonderful it is. And honestly, because of all these times she'd said that to me, and I'd read in the newspaper about mothers who killed their children, I put two and two together, and so I had an emergency plan how I was going to rescue the other children when Mom decided to do us all a favor. And yet, despite that, I also inherited this unexpected hope. And from day one, so being religious, conventionally religious, was never an option for me, probably because, of course, of my past. I was totally uninterested in religion as a culture, as a sociological reality, as an organization. Totally bored. If that was all there was, I'd have been gone, so gone. For me, it was reality or nothing. I had read, we had to memorize scripture. I grew up no Bible, no breakfast, so we had all the scripture memory. And I knew, I had memorized, you know, the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, long-suffering, self-control. And I remember telling God very seriously, I said, Lord, if that is true, I want to dive into the heart of it. But if it's not true, I don't want any part of it, and I give you 1 year to show me which one it is. I mean, yeah, so I wasn't messing around, and I still to this day have zero interest in religion as, I don't know, a way to pass the time or just something that just isn't life-changing. So I'm very, very grateful. Not only had I been raised with stories of conversion, I saw my own father go through a massive conversion when I was 10 years old. It was very interesting, he comes from a totally irreligious family. So he would definitely be a nun, you know, as I talk about in the book, the unaffiliated. But my mother had been raised in a religious family, so to marry her, he went through a baptism, but without any personal faith. So almost immediately he was baptized, and then he just, they disappeared from the church, of course. When I was 10, he went through a huge personal conversion. And one of the really amazing stories is that he, who was a pack-and-a-half-day smoker and had been for at least 10 years, had smoking just lifted within a week from his life. And he told me later, he said, you know, I didn't ask God for help. I never prayed about it. I didn't do a thing. It just vanished. Now, when I've later I remember telling a bunch of Dominican priests about this. I don't know why, it just came up. And it was funny. I got the impression they'd have been so much happier if I'd been able to tell them that my father had been healed because he went through 5 years of therapy. That would be a lot more comfortable than thinking that, well, you went through a conversion and God just lifted it. So it's fascinating at many levels. You know, his whole life, this shy man who was, in fact, a rocket scientist, but he was very shy, went out, he started preaching as a lay preacher in local little congregations. He would go out and raise money and then distribute Bibles. He was a Gideon, where they put the Bibles, you know, in those hotel rooms. Okay, he was one of those people. Led Bible studies at work, you know, with all other space rocket scientists, and all sorts of things, because he was just on fire. And so not only had I heard all these stories growing up, but I had seen my father go through this. So it was very living for us. It gave us a hope that just transcended even, this terrible background. And so, so my approach was definitely reality or nothing. I'm not messing around. So Lord, the ball's in your court. Okay? I'm here, I'm eager, I'm willing. And God has really honored that over the years. I had an adult conversion in college as an undergraduate. Actually, the turning point was in Manhattan, in New York City, staying at what was then the Sloan House YMCA, which was, let's put it this way, they had cops at all the elevators, and their cockroaches were crawling all over the rooms and all the bathrooms. And a woman who I met up there was terrified, and she said she was looking for me for protection against I don't know what. So it was a pretty grim environment, but it was 2 doors from the Empire State Building. So that was my thing. I was thrilled to be in Manhattan finally. And my turning point, honestly, I was sitting in the basement, the hot, sweaty, unair-conditioned basement of the Sloan House YMCA on the hottest day in October in, I don't know, decades, I guess, in the middle of a garbage strike. So everything smelled as well as being hot. And I was sitting next to a dead cockroach, which is all very, I guess it was part of the story, all by myself. And my turning point was very low key. I had been, I was on this trip around the country, and I had been wrestling with God at different points in the journey, because I thought, now that I am really mature, because I was like between my second and third year of university, so now that I was a fully grown, mature adult, I felt capable of finally sorting out this whole Christianity thing for myself, and whether I was going to take it or dismiss it, And so I did issue basically a sort of challenge to God. I said, Lord, if you're real, speak to me, basically. And it was very interesting. That was I was outside of Quebec when I told him that. I was in Harvard Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when I picked up a Bible and another book, and is all part of the journey. And then I was in Manhattan when I finally, as I say in the book, I dropped my nets. And for me, all I said out loud was, okay, Jesus. It was that simple. And there was no one around me, and there was no emotional pressure. But I came home a totally transformed, my direction of my life, not totally transformed, but the direction of my life had changed dramatically. And at some level, I've never looked back from that. When people ask me what I recommend, I would say start young. Honestly, in my case, I needed it because I was such a mess. Honestly, I had to learn everything as a young adult. My parents could not teach me anything, so all the standard skills, interpersonal skills, you name it, the most basic things, I had to learn on my own. And so for me, starting young was hugely, because I've had the experience of that, being open to that grace of the Holy Spirit for years. I had a quite extraordinary mentor. I was a Quaker in college before I was Catholic. And I had an extraordinary woman minister who was my mentor and my role model. And so that was hugely important. And my turning point, however, regarding the church also happened as an undergrad a couple of years or a year or so after my conversion. I was looking for a place to pray during the day. One of the first charisms that emerged in my life after my conversion was intercessory prayer. I was looking for a place to pray. Protestant churches were closed. Catholic churches were open, though I didn't know why. So I walked across the threshold of what I now know to be the Dominican parish in Seattle, and its name was Blessed Sacrament. But of course, I had no idea what that meant. Now, I had been raised as an anti-Catholic fundamentalist. So I really believed the whole horror of Babylon. Do you know about that? Oh, some of you do. I can see. Yes, you're all going, yes. For those of you who don't know, the idea is that basically the Catholic Church is the horror of Babylon described in the book of Revelation. And the Pope is sort of kind of an antichrist. And I grew up only 2 doors from St. Clair's Catholic Church, which I presumed was the anteroom of hell, of course. And now, on Halloween, do you celebrate Halloween here? You don't, okay. Do you understand the tradition in the U.S.? You know, you go around, you say trick or treat, and you get goodies and chocolate and stuff like that. Okay. Well, my brother and I would go out trick or treating as young children, you know, and normally we would have nothing to do with Catholics, right? But when it comes to chocolate, pretty much Catholic chocolate is as good as anybody else's chocolate. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to be too dogmatic about this. And so one time when we were about 8 or 9, there was a convent of sisters, and they had the tradition. How you know that the house has got candy for you is they have a light on. They have a pumpkin on the doorstep carved, you know, with the face. And the pumpkin was there and the light was on, so we said, okay, you know. And so we thought, feeling incredibly daring, we walked up to the door and we went, ready to say, trick or treat, when they opened. And nobody opened the door. And then we heard this cackle from above us, and I looked up, and there was one of the sisters dressed in black like a witch. And she was going, yeah, like this. And I looked up and I thought, it's all true. Everything I've been told is true, you know. Please don't do that to your fundamentalist neighbors, okay? It kept me out for years. So you have to understand. So I walk in as a university student into this Catholic church looking for a place to pray. I've got my head filled with this anti-Catholic mush. Everything was still in place. And I walked in and I felt the real presence. Now, what I would have said to you, of course, I didn't know about the real presence, and I didn't know what Blessed Sacrament meant, and even if you had explained it to me, I would not have believed you. Because frankly, I thought Catholics were all pagans who had no idea about real relationship with Christ, and were all working their way to heaven and all that stuff, and they were all part of the Whore of Babylon. And but I recognized a presence of God in that place. So I started praying in Catholic churches after that. And I'd go into really pretty Protestant churches, and I'd say, well, this is really pretty, except the presence isn't here. And I thought, that's odd, it's empty. So I'd go back to the local to Blessed Sacrament. My friends kept saying, if you don't stop hanging out in those Catholic churches, you're going to become Catholic, you know. And I said, that is like the dumbest thing anybody has ever said. I mean, come on. But actually one day, speaking of the thresholds, that mystical experience for me was the bridge of trust. In terms of the church, I was already a disciple, but I had to repeat those stages in my journey into the Catholic Church. And, you know, I think I really decided God knew. Most of the stories you hear about converts these days, they read their way into the church. You know, it's a theological, historical, I mean, all this stuff. I've read all those books, but that wasn't why I entered. I entered because of a direct mystical experience. Remember, my motto was reality or nothing. So I'm not interested in just theory. And God probably knew that and knew He had to get my attention. The only way I was open. And so I started praying at Blessed Sacrament Church, and I would take my shoes off and walk around. I pad a lot. And that meant I read those little things in the vestibule. You know, they put those out for people like me, hoping. And yes, indeed, I started to read them. And so I picked up a little, but it was very interesting. I really resented Mass because I figured all those pagans were cluttering up my personal prayer place. And so I'd go, oh, those Catholics, they're here doing that inconceivable, incomprehensible thing they do. And none of them knows what's really going on. They're not disciples. And you know, I've had to repent, of course, since, but a lot. But it was interesting. One day I was walking around and there was a statue of a young woman. Now, by this point, I realized that meant she was a saint. That's what Catholics would call her. And that mostly what that meant was that she was a really outstanding Christian. But I knew that Catholics believed you could ask saints to pray for you. And so I don't even know why I did it, but I was really hungry to know what God wanted me to do. That was the big cry of my heart as a young adult. What was his purpose for me? Especially if you come from a background as hard as mine, I needed desperately to know I had a really significant purpose in life. And so on the spur of the moment, the young woman statue was there, and there was a name at the bottom that said Catherine of Siena. And so I said, "Hey, Kate, you're a young woman." That's all I knew. Well, I could tell from the statue. I said, "You get it. They tell me I can ask you to pray for me." And so, like, Lord, if like I'm interfering with your glory, or, doing anything wrong, you just let me know. I'm sorry. But, hey, Kate, if you could pray for me, that I could figure out what God wants me to do, because I really, really want to know. And then the next moment, I turned to the ceiling, and I don't even know why, and I just said, "And if there's anything to this Catholic thing, I'm open." 60 seconds later, I thought, that is the dumbest prayer I have ever prayed. But I didn't take it back, And I knew nothing about the thresholds, of course, not for years afterwards. But essentially, I had declared myself open. I had moved into openness, and essentially into a whole new spiritual realm, and I had no clues at all. So those were a couple of really important turning points for me. But that hunger to know what God's purpose for me was still really there. And in many ways, for me, entering the church, people ask me, why did you become Catholic? And in the end, I always say, I became Catholic to follow Jesus. I wanted to be in the center of his body on earth and not on the periphery. I wanted to be where his redemptive, transforming, healing, self-offering was the center of worship, was the graces were poured out. I wanted to be part of the communion of saints. I wanted to, have those. I didn't want to be sort of a stepchild. I wanted to be, right at the center. And so becoming Catholic, of course, opened the doors for me in ways I didn't understand that were related to my call in life. It was a couple of years later, 2 years almost exactly, that I was kneeling by myself at a Mass in Seattle. And it was January is not summer in Seattle. January is lousy. It is cold and rainy and bleak and gray and unrelenting. And so it was one of those really nasty January days in Seattle, and I was by myself at a parish I did not know. I didn't know a soul. And as I was kneeling for the consecration, God spoke to me out of the blue. And I had been seeking to know his purposes for me for a long time. But he said, there are three big thoughts that came to me, very clear. I didn't hear any voice, but it was interior, just three incredibly clear thoughts out of the blue. And it said, you have a vocation to call forth the vocations of others. This is a vocation and not a career. And I didn't even know there was a difference. That was my first clue, that there were two different things. And everything you need will be provided for you. It was one of those experiences, very rare in my life, where you don't have to discern it. It's so clear, it's so obvious. You either say yes or you say no. It's like, And so I went and basically went in front of the Blessed Sacrament after Mass and spent a half an hour saying yes, yes, yes. Within a month, I'd signed up for grad school. I had changed my whole life. I gave up most of my discretionary time and money. I thought it was only for the duration of grad school. It turned out to be for the duration of most of my life, and began preparation. And literally, one thing after another, people sometimes do me the undeserved honor by asking what my 5-year plan is, and I laugh, and all I can say is I have a 2-year guess. That's as close as it comes. But every step along the way, you take one step of obedience, and God leads, and that leads to the next one, it leads to the next one. And so it really is about doing the next obvious, practical, immediate thing. Whatever light you have, that's what you do. And for me, it happened to be grad school. But when I finished grad school, the man who oversaw my internship, my student internship, asked me to create a way to help his leaders discern their gifts. And so the summer after grad school, I created what became the Called and Gifted, of course, as a volunteer with no clues in the world about the significance of that. Offered it that fall to 20 handpicked people, and basically the rest is history. So what would I say? I'm incredibly grateful to the mercy of God. When I was 21, I heard somebody recite what immediately became my life verse. It's Isaiah 58, 10 through 12. And I never heard it before. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know why. It just totally resonated with me. I immediately memorized it. And I have seen every single thing come true. Though at that point it all seemed impossible. It says, if you will give yourself to the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness, and your gloom will become like midday. And the Lord will continually guide you and satisfy your desire in scorched places and give strength to your bones. And you will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. And those from among you will restore the ancient ruins. They will raise up the age-old foundations, and you will be called the repairer of the breach, the restorers of streets in which to dwell. Age-old foundation, ancient ruins. I was a Baptist. We don't have those. You know, my future as a Catholic was completely hidden from me at that moment. And yet, I needed, every time I needed some kind of clear sign, God provided for me at some level. Has it been easy? No, it's been very difficult at long portions. It is a long obedience to answer a call, even when you know what it is. You know, it doesn't become simple. And there's a way of disciplined grace that goes in the middle of it. And yet I want to tell you right now, I don't know, my sense was I was supposed to talk about this. I don't know who this is for or how many of you this resonates with. But if it were me, I would want to encourage you very much to seek God diligently and on a sustained way for guidance as to where you have personally been called. There is someone out there who is waiting for what you have been given to give, and their life hangs in the balance. Really, seriously. It matters that you say yes. It matters. And you and I we're not cogs at all. We are relating channels of grace. And your charisms, your life, your yes, your vocation, the grace of God that's going to pass through that is going to literally change the course of history if we are willing to say yes to Him. And it is the shortest, your vocation is the shortest and surest path to your ultimate happiness, to your healing, to the fulfillment of your heart's desire. I love what John Henry Newman says. He says, God is determined that I should reach that which will me my greatest happiness. He looks on me individually. He calls me by my name. He knows what I can do, what I can best be, what is my greatest happiness, and He means to give it to me. God knows what is my greatest happiness, and He means to give it to me. That was that promise which I stumbled across in the vestibule of Blessed Sacrament Church all those years ago, was the thing I clung to. And God has truly answered that. He has provided. And so I just want to say that to you. Some of you I sense, maybe a few of you here, I don't know who, are on the verge of making a decision. That's important. You have a sense perhaps that God is calling you to something new, or you're on the, I don't know, you're on the edge of some kind of decision. Trust that God's purposes for you are good, that they're going to fit you. They are your shortest and surest path to your ultimate happiness, and they are the way that you will help other people reach their ultimate happiness. Because honestly, what makes you happy is the first question in Catholic moral theology, even though most of us don't know that. Because that's what this drama is all about. And so that's what I guess I just had a sense I need to tell you. Do not despair. Seek God's face. Seek the counsel of others. Take seriously your gifts, your charisms, the trajectory of your life, your natural talents, all of those things. Much of God's will for you is written in you, in your uniqueness. That's part of the pattern. But also be open to the possibility that He might speak to you. Maybe not in dramatic ways, maybe through somebody else, but even He might speak to you really clearly at some point. And so if you've wondered, I just want to let you know, it is perfectly normal not to know what you are called to do when you're 21. Really, the idea that you're supposed to know when you graduate from college, that's very rare. The truth is, most of us find out as we go through life. A lot of us find out later, because young adulthood is the time where we are being prepared by God to be the person who can hear and answer the call when it comes. And so your yes to God right now, wherever you are, is part of that preparation. And your openness and your hunger, and you're basically getting in God's face on a regular basis and saying, I'm serious here. I really, really want, to know, what am I called to do? How can I answer that call? He is not messing with us. He does know what is our greatest happiness, and He does mean to give it to us. If we stay with Him, He will enable us to reach it. We may not have names for it, we may not have a label for it, but we will be able to live it. And it matters that every one of us lives it, because it will change the course of history for someone or for many someones. And that is part of the beauty and the power of living as disciples and the significance of that. So I'm stopping right there. Thank you for listening to me sort of mumble my way through that. And I'm just very grateful for the chance of spending some time here in Parramatta with all these wonderful people whom God is preparing for wonderful things. So thank you.